house and another 1,000 for a shop. So the circumstances he has escaped versus the circumstances he is in now after reaching Delhi, and safe, or whatever condition he could reach in best. It's not a great sort of situation to be in. He struggles for days going from one office to another, even visiting Nehru's house, where he faces betrayal once again. After days of struggle, Ishwar Kaur and her father decide to go and live with a relative in Shahadra. Lastly, Kanshi Ram and others settle in the Kingsway camp on Alipur Road in 2 rooms. Now we begin with the aftermath, which is part 3 of the novel and the last part. In the last part, the aftermath, so after everything has happened, okay, they've lost so many members of their family, friends. Kanshi Ram struggles at the rehabilitation center and Arun gets admission to Delhi University. So, rehabilitation center for refugees, okay. Sunanda begins to earn a living by stitching clothes. So, Kanshi Ram's wife. Lala Kanshi Ram travels by bus in Delhi and reminisces on the tiring government system of getting a house. So, he remembers, or he thinks back to उन्हें याद आता है the tiring government system of getting a house, because it's very difficult to get a house. You have to register the land, आपको उसके sale deed and all lots of things are involved, right? When you have to buy a house. So all the trouble, सारी मुश्किलें जो घर खरीदने में आती हैं, he's thinking about everything because he still उन्होंने अभी भी घर नहीं खरीदा है. He enjoys the hustle bustle of Delhi and reaches camp at 7 in the evening. Hustle bustle, city life, शहरी दुनिया, right? Because countryside, village, गांव are quieter. वहाँ पे life peaceful होती है, slow paced, धीरे धीरे जाती है. City is very fast. They have just begun to achieve a semblance of normalcy. So semblance is seemingly, not really normal, असली में नहीं है, but कुछ उसके जैसा, a semblance of normalcy in their life. News of Mahatma Gandhi's assassination is received. So just when they are about to live a normal life, or at least closer to normality or normalcy, Mahatma Gandhi has been assassinated. The radio announcement is just like the announcement about the partition, but Lala Kanshi Ram is only focused on Gandhi's death and ignores the insignificant words. So he's only focused on what is important. क्या जरूरी है और इधर उधर की बातें नहीं, किसी की opinions नहीं, but what are the facts. Bibi Amarvati blames Gandhi for the partition, but Arun defends him that Nehru and other political leaders are responsible for it. Now, this is one of the reasons that people still say, right, that Gandhi was assassinated, he was killed. So there are people who think that was right, there are people who think that should not have happened. So similarly, you have two sides at that time. उस समय भी ये दो sides थी. They speculate that the shooter must be a Punjabi. The narrator gives a glimpse of how they earn their livelihood through a small stall of groceries in the camp and face tough competition. Now, Lala has stopped wearing a turban, which was a sign of dignity. And we do know that, partition after partition in 1984, which is, of course, you can say around more than 30 years after partition, 30 साल बाद भी we had the riots in Delhi. Indira Gandhi was assassinated and you had the Khalistani. So seeds of that, उसके बीज यहीं से बोने शुरू होते हैं. Yeah. So Lala has stopped wearing a turban, which was a sign of dignity. Now he's focused on earning a livelihood only. So he has to earn for his family and settle down. That's his main aim. Along with Arun, his son, he goes to Bazaar to listen to the news of Gandhi's death, which is like a personal loss for him and others. Because people loved Gandhi, right? They followed his ideology, उनके ख्याल और उनके जीने का तरीका, his lifestyle, everything. Gandhi's death is shown as the nation's loss. So, father of the nation, right? His death. At night, Lala feels scared and thinks about his loss to gain this freedom. So when, after all, because he escaped, so he came to Delhi and he came to India from Pakistan. So now he is a free man. तो वो आजाद है, right? The title of the book is also आजादी. But क्या क्या देना पड़ा और क्या क्या गवाना पड़ा उस आजादी को पाने के लिए. So to gain this freedom, जो भी loss हुआ, जो भी lose किया, was that worth it? They all remain awake at night, fearing another riot or betrayal from their own people. So because there is still, you're not truly free. When you आप जब रात को सो भी नहीं सकते बिना टेंशन के, so you're not really free, right? Because you are afraid somebody might attack, somebody might kidnap you, somebody might ask you for money, steal from you, anything. All remain awake at night, the fear of an announcement that can change their lives forever. So first announcement was on the radio about the partition, second announcement, Gandhi's death. So it's almost like you're waiting for the next announcement, something even worse. और भी क्या इससे ज्यादा बुरा हो सकता है? The story ends with the noise of Sunanda's sewing machine, which reminds them of their unending struggles and loss. So रात को भी she is working, she can't rest. So unending struggles. The struggles never end. That's the aftermath. Now, themes and analysis: violence and trauma. In 1947, India achieved its freedom through, though at terrible loss, of being divided into two. The Muslim-dominated northern part becomes Pakistan and the rest the Republic of India. The hasty decision, hasty as in ढंग से सोचा नहीं गया इस डिसीजन के बारे में, it was too quick, बहुत जल्दी ले लिया गया decision, was responsible for the migration of lakhs, the deaths of thousands, rapes, displacement, riots, kidnapping, affecting more than 15 million people. The horrific event gave birth to a new type of literature in which writers explored the trauma and violence at different levels, like physical, sexual, and psychological. Psychological will be loss of your homeland, right? Of your motherland. K. Nageshwar Rao. So the new type of literature that comes out of partition is partition literature. Until date, you have writers and poets, filmmakers trying to depict partition or what they think happened, or their version, or stories from refugees that they receive. K. Nageshwar Rao talks about this phenomenon as he says that the blood-curdling colossal event, very big event, stirred the minds of Indian writers, and as a result of it, a number of novels were written. So you have Saadat Hasan Manto. You have Manto writing. There is a Netflix documentary also on Manto. Then you have movies like Bhag Milkha Bhag, where partition is depicted for a short time. You have Gadar. You have so many different movies and TV shows, books, poems. A number of novels were written. The tragedy of partition, which resulted in complete chaos and destruction, provided the writers with a rich source of treasure for their pen. So because there was so much material to write on, even if it's one person's story, it's so important because what they have gone through is very important for everybody to know. Many writers and critics like Chaman Nahal, the author of this book, looked at it as an act of selfishness by political leaders, religious gurus, and the British government. British government, that while going, you gave us freedom, or at least seemingly, or a semblance of freedom, not really freedom, because you also did the partition. You were responsible for doing the partition, right? And religious gurus, so people who thought they were doing this for their respective religions, they thought they were वो लोगों के हित में काम कर रहे थे, political leaders as well. So, but really it was self-interest and selfishness, right? So Chaman Nahal also looked at it that way. That you did it for yourself, not for anybody else, because ordinary people are dying, being raped, killed, being stolen from. Satendra Shoran, in his essay Tyranny of Partition, a retrospective analysis of Chaman Nahal's Azadi, writes that the two countries commenced their independence with bust economies and lands without an entrenched, competent system of government, and continues to say that the novel portrays a realistic historical documentation of the atrocious confrontations caused by the partition through a literary perspective. realistic historical. It's not romanticized. It's not glorified. That partition was this great thing. The reality of it. असलियत क्या थी उसकी? That's what is depicted in partition literature often. Nahal writes a very physical or graphic account. So graphic is very, very direct. You say it as it is. If somebody is being killed, you through your words portray the scene of being killed. So very, very graphic. It's आपको uncomfortable बनाता है वो. So you can't really sometimes read it at one go. Of the chaos and destruction that resulted in an aftermath of the partition. He gives disturbing visual details while describing the slaughter of men, killing of men, women, and children, and mutilated bodies. So we discussed mutilation last time. So mutilation is completely destroying, killing somebody. So it's a dead body now once you've killed somebody, but mutilated is almost कि आप पहचान भी नहीं पा रहे हो face or body, right? So if somebody dies in a fire, the body is destroyed to the point that you can't even identify the person. Vandalized properties, destroyed, ruined properties, and other hateful acts. The madness, the frenzy, and hysteria of the mobs is captured well by the writer. For example, the narrator describes a stabbing in graphic detail. Stabbing is so you use a knife or some sharp weapon or object to, stab somebody. The intestines of the man would have spilled from the body and would be lying next to him in a pool of his blood. Another example of this physical portrayal of violence is the description of the burning bodies. So like I just said, sometimes when bodies are burnt or if somebody dies in a fire, your body and face is mutilated absolutely. कि कोई और उसे identify पहचान भी नहीं सकता. Another example of this physical is the description of burning bodies. Nahal writes about the sound, the smells, and color of the scene. So how did blood smell? How did it sound? The sound of killing somebody or the sound of somebody dying. Color of the blood. So it's very, very graphic. Too many details. Readers can actually visualize the horror with words like the unbearable stench. Something is smelling really bad. Heaps of bodies piled up on one another. The fires were roaring and hissing. He further writes, they saw there was only dismembered limbs, dozens of them. So you have cut up the body parts as well. You can't identify कि कौन सा body part किसको belong करता है, right? Dozens of them, legs and arms and hands and thighs and feet, parts which had not fully burned stood out. And there were skulls, again dozens of them. So after so many people have died, they're not even being buried or cremated. ना तो bodies जलाई जा रही है, ना वो दफनाई जा रही है. Many lay face down, the others faced the sky or looked sideways. Bare jaws scooped out eye sockets, gnashing teeth. Very often a skull cracked open with a popping noise, its bones disintegrating into the heap around. So nobody has the time or nobody cares to bury those bodies, or because there is just so many. Everybody is protecting their own self. The novel is full of similar horrible visual accounts of the painful events. Shaman Nahal is not the first writer to write about Indian history and partition. Salman Rushdie in Midnight's Children. So for Midnight's Children, Salman Rushdie won the Booker Prize in 1975. In 1980s. And Khushwant Singh in Train to Pakistan, 1955. And Salman Rushdie, I believe, was the first Indian writer in English to win the Booker Prize. Khushwant Singh in Train to Pakistan also used the chronicles of the history of India to create fictional tales. Rushdie's novels are allegorical and examine historical and philosophical issues. Allegory is, what is an allegory? It's a tale, a short tale, usually with a moral lesson. Okay? Characters are surreal, so bizarre, almost like unreal, with a brooding sense of humor, so dark humor. Because when there is so much sadness around and hate around, the only way to fight it is maybe through humor. He is known for his controversial religious portrayals. and Salman Rushdie's novel was also banned. One of his novels, The Satanic Verses. Okay, so that's why many people who are custodians of religion or who have problems with Salman Rushdie are actually very religious or often conservative. That's why controversial religious portrayals are often banned. Manto is another writer who has written extensively about the partition. However, in his works such as the short story Toba Tek Singh, I recommend all of you read Toba Tek Singh. It's not a long story, it's a very, very short story. Manto focuses more on the psychological aspects of the violence and trauma on the mental asylum inmates. So, it's like, the world outside the mental asylum, it's so crazy. So, we just said, right? No bodies being buried, parts just thrown around, bodies being just piled on top of each other. So how does that contrast with the world inside the mental asylum? Who is actually mad, right? So people inside or outside? Manto focuses more on the psychological aspects of the violence and trauma on mental asylum inmates. Dr. Mohan Radhakrishnan's Manto's legendary contribution to partition literature of India argues that his works have been more controversial for his explicit portrayals. Again, explicit is graphic or direct. So no sugar coating, anything. जैसा है वैसा आप दिखा रहे हो. Explicit portrayals of violence including rape, murder, abduction of women, violation of holy places, loss of life, kidnapping, and the distorted identity of a generation. So people who migrated at that time, whether from India to Pakistan or Pakistan to India, so distorted identity. You don't know who you are anymore. You have left your homeland behind. Are you so your religious identity, your national identity, your social identity, your professional identity. आप काम क्या करते थे छोड़ने से पहले? अब वो काम नहीं कर सकते आप because you have to survive. Maybe you are doing something completely different that you have never done in life. Maybe back home you had a business. People who had business in partition, they have to leave that business behind, that setup behind, and run just for their life. Your identity is distorted. आपकी identity खराब हो गई है, right? Or at least टेढ़ी मेढ़ी, you don't know who you are. In his works, Manto explores what this trauma did to the psyche of individuals. So how it affected their mind. Like Chaman Nahal's Azadi, Khushwant Singh in Train to Pakistan, 1955, also tells the story of migration after the announcement of the partition. However, Nahal's graphic narratives of physical violence and destruction are different from Khushwant Singh's portrayal of the nation's situation of physical torture and psychological outburst. Bilkis Dar, in the theme of partition in Khushwant Singh's novel The Train to Pakistan, Singh weaves so this is what Bilkis Dar says in the essay. Singh weaves a narrative around life in this village, making the village a microcosm representing the larger world. When people live together or they fight in a smaller area or in a smaller community, you can use that as a metaphor for the larger nation or the larger world. That's a microcosm. In Azadi, there is ample depiction of the violence that engulfed the entire nation after its division on religious lines. The trauma that results from the horrifying scenes all around is also evident in the sounds of wailing that rend the sky. There is, however, another kind of another kind of trauma that the characters experience. This is the trauma of being dislodged from their roots overnight. It is the trauma of losing one's home, one's homeland, one's livelihood, and all that one had loved and treasured. Partition thus does not just result in physical violence and trauma, but mental as well, for it is irreparably affected the psyche of all those who lived through it and would affect all who relive it in times to come through narratives like these. Even people who probably are still alive, they have heard of their grandmothers or grandparents' stories, parents' stories. When they read a narrative of about the partition again, so they relive the trauma. It all comes back to you. You remember it. Like Khushwant Singh, Chaman Nahal is also a partition survivor. He was just 19 years old in 1947, and like Arun, he had to face the death of his sister, Kartar Devi. So when we go to the novel, uh, yeah, when we go to the novel, you'll see the dedication is to the memory of Kartar Devi. Now that's Chaman Nahal's sister, okay? Yeah, we'll read a little bit of the novel today. The chronicle of, the death of Madhu is also symbolic of the death of multiple other sisters lost or killed in riots. The chronicle of the horrific political and historical event is personal for him. That's why you have autobiographical elements. Atmakatha, okay? Uh, Nahal's famous quote is that the study of history is a study of the alternative choices open to a people at a particular time. Further, in his autobiography, Silent Life, Memoirs of a Writer, he accepts that he has put a strong sense of place in Azadi. The novel is a quest for Kanshi Ram and Arun to lose and find their new identity and home. Similarly, Nahal too had to forge a new identity in the wake of dislocation and exile from his place of birth. So, H. Asharafunisha and Dr. A. Glory explore how the private experience of Nahal are elevated very skillfully to public consciousness. Unlike Salman Rushdie, Chaman Nahal does not side with any religion. He uses Kanshi Ram's voice to explain that both Hindus and Muslims have faced the consequences of the selfish and foolish decisions of political and religious leaders. Kanshi Ram's statement that I have ceased to hate, yes, I can't hate Muslims anymore, hating won't bring anything back, is more like Nahal's own statement to forget his hatred. So this comes on page number 388 of the novel. Nahal's love for his birthplace, Sialkot, is evident when he chooses to establish his character in Sialkot. Like Arun and Lala Kanshiram, he dreams of living in Sialkot forever. In his essay, Writing a Historical Novel, he says, one of the themes that I came to be occupied with after the partition of India was that of forced exile. I was born in Sialkot, and after 1947, we were driven away to India. Till this day, I pine for the city in which I was born and raised. I see this as a typical yearning of all voluntary exiles. So, people who leave the country, by choice, as well as who are forcibly exiled, right? Both voluntary as well as involuntary, दोनों को अपना घर याद आता है equally. Hence, I wrote Azadi as a hymn to one's land of birth, rather than a realistic novel of partition. It's almost like a dedication, so a tribute to Sialkot. So his writing style is, according to Bharatendra Choran, has objectified his personal experience of trauma and violence. The autobiographical element of the novel brings us even closer to the horror that is being described, because all the time we are aware that the same is being written by someone who lived through it himself. That's why it's more powerful. So when you know that this person जो लिख रहा है, that person has been through this, उससे गुजर चुका है, so you read it with even more interest, and it hits you harder. Yeah, so now the historical and political element. We'll just Nahal is known to have believed that history is all about alternative choices, and Bill Davidson underlines one alternative clearly in his discussion with Arun and Munir. Bill Davidson, if you remember, character, okay? He firmly believes that the Cabinet Commission plan would have been the best plan for the future of India, but the Indian leaders threw it away foolishly. The politicians and religious leaders play their disruptive politics. Disruptive is able to cause conflict, problems, with not a single thought for the millions or ordinary human beings, citizens who would be affected by their decisions. Now, the quest for identity, and then you have, losing your homeland, finding a new identity, the Gandhi Quartet, and you have, so a lot of you have asked me questions about, what kind of questions will be asked. So yeah, we'll just discuss that. You might be asked about the character sketch of the characters. Lala Kanshiram, therefore you have the important characters in a study material. So, or you might be asked to comment on the characters. Like, what do you feel about their characters, or what decisions they took in their life or in this novel? So, आप क्या सोचते हो, right? And then you can be asked that comment if the partition, how partition affected their lives. So you can be asked that take any two characters from the novel that you've read, which is Azadi, and discuss or explain how partition affected their lives. Okay, as well as themes of trauma. So maybe explain violence and trauma, these two central themes, using the example of any two characters that you've read. Okay, so some of the questions can be these. So I hope that helps, and we'll just go over the summary of the whatever we've read. So the novel shows the horror of violence, the plight of refugees, the frenzy caused by religious and political aspirations, and both the bestial and humanitarian side of mankind. So the animalistic, the bad side of humankind, as well as the good, helping or kind side of humankind. And somebody has just asked me the meaning of allegorical. So allegory is a story, poem, or any piece of text or narrative which is sort of a tale. Okay, a tale or a story which is moral in nature. Typically it's moral or a political story. So it's supposed to teach you some lesson. It can be a short story, it can be a novel. It can be a myth as well. We have a lot of stories in mythology, gods, right? The novel shows the horror of violence, the plight of refugees, the frenzy caused by religious and political aspirations. Nahal does not blame any religion for the chaos, but he completely agrees that the partition was a wrong and hasty decision, and holds the politicians and religious leaders responsible for the mayhem, chaos that followed in the wake of the division of the country. So we discussed about the questions that can be asked particularly from this novel, as well as, so you can be asked also to compare the two novels. The previous one was Anand Math. So Anand Math is a nationalist novel, and here you have vision of the nation itself. So you can be asked to comment on the idea of nation or nationalism in light of these two novels. Okay? Nahal carefully portrays how people have thought of Gandhi as a saint who can fight against the British, and at the same time shows up the other political leaders as confused, helpless, or selfish and inhumane. The graphic portrayal of the pain, the chronicles of history, the political opinions, and the religious frenzy, religious madness make the novel one of the best additions to partition literature in India. So you can also be asked to compare and contrast the characters. I mean, this paper it's a new paper, you don't have featured questions. Okay, that's why. So some of these steps are being taught for the first time. And also the screen not visible? Okay, I'll share it again. Yeah, I hope it's visible now. Yeah. And somebody also asked me the meaning of brooding. So that means showing deep thought about something. So you're thinking about something very deeply, often thinking about something that makes you really sad. Okay, so of course, if you are remembering your homeland, like if you know, as we just discussed, in relevance of in light of partition literature, then of course that would make you sad, angry, or worried about your own situation currently. So that's brooding. Okay, so graphic portrayal of the pain makes it one of the best novels of partition literature. Nahal's fictionalization. So even though there are autobiographical elements, this is a fictional story. These characters did not exist in real life. It's fiction, right? The author has imagined these characters and this story. Nahal's fictionalization of history gives the face to the innumerable statistics one reads about in connection with the colossal event. It forces one to introspect, and lest one loses hope in the essential goodness of man. Nahal includes people like Barkat Ali or the Hakim of Narowal, who prays for the protection of the Hindu women and for forgiveness of the brutality of the mob. So, people who were officers who were asked to record, okay, these many people died, these many people missing, these many people burnt, these many people stabbed, or these many people given houses, left. So, such stories make us realize that people are not just numbers. They do have a story, right? They lived a life or they're still living a life and they're not just numbers. So, they do matter. Okay, you can't just put everybody in number and say, okay, these people died, they had no, their story deserves to be heard or read. So, seeing the atrocities and the brutality, cruelty on both sides, Lala Kanshi Rams admits to his wife, I can't hate the Muslims anymore. What I mean is, whatever they did to us in Pakistan, we're doing it to them here. So it's both sides, right? Writer seems to suggest that this attitude and realization is probably the only way forward, because the azadi or freedom that has been thrust on people has ended up creating only divisions amongst them. So 1947, of course, India became independent on 14th August, but at what cost? Partition. So the azadi of freedom that was announced, that was thrust or given to people, ended up creating only divisions amongst them. Okay, now we move on to the novel. So we'll just read a few pages of part 1, which is the lull. Now, Shaman Nahal has dedicated the novel to his sister, who passed away, Kartar Devi. And the novel begins with a stanza. So, a verse by Rabindranath Tagore. Some of you might already have read it. This is a very, very famous verse, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words came out from the depth of truth, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, into that heaven of freedom, because we're speaking about freedom. Firstly, Azadi, which is true freedom. What is exactly true freedom? What constitutes true freedom? Into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake. Now, principal characters. So usually in novels, you don't have a page which presents characters like this. In plays, you do, right? So when you read a play, it presents the characters. But this is not very usual or not common for a novelist to do this. So Lala Kanshi Ram, you have Prabharani, his wife, Madhubala, their daughter, Arun Kumar, their son. So Madhu, we remember, died, right? She passed away. And Arun is the one who's a university student. And when they come to Delhi, he enrolls in Delhi University. And then you have Sunanda, Suraj Prakash, and a lot of minor characters. Yeah. The Lull, part 1. It was the 3rd of June 1947. This evening, the Viceroy was to make an important announcement. That's what Lala Kanshi Ram told his wife, Prabharani, whose education had become his task. So he's teaching her. Okay, he's also not just her husband, but also her teacher. in the sense that what is going on in the world, current affairs, okay, knowledge, general knowledge. Lala Kanshi Ram was not too literate himself. It is doubtful if he ever finished high school. But life had rolled him around, misfortunes had come and gone, and this had given an edge to his intelligence. So when you experience a lot of things, बहुत ज़्यादा आपको अनुभव हो जाता है लाइफ में, you learn how to deal with things. So that's also how you become intelligent, through experiences, not just reading. Okay? Now, experience is a very important part of knowledge. And then he at least knew fairly well one local language, Urdu, which was the first language he had learned to read and write. So he is literate, of course. He knows how to read and write. His own language was Hindi, or so it was supposed to be. For over 20 years, he had been an ardent member of the district Arya Samaj. So Arya Samaj, if we know, it was started by Swami Dayanand Saraswati to actually reform Hinduism. So do away with a lot of things like idol worship, sati pratha. So passionate, very, very passionate, dedicated member of the district Arya Samaj Association. And one thing that the Samaj had done was to give status to the low and the humble. Was he the son of a rich man or poor? Did he inherit landed property? Or did he or not? So these were the questions the Arya Samaj did not care one bit for. So often there are, religions or religious places or associations or fellowships which ask you for money or where you come from or who was your father to become a member. But Arya Samaj is not like that. Or at least Arya Samaj that, he was part of, Lala Kanshi Ram was part of, was not like that. They did not care about where he came from, who his father was, how much property he had, okay? So long as you could tie a white turban on your head in a becoming manner, and so long as you boasted of an upright moral character, if you're a good person, and if you can just tie a turban around your head, pagdi, some sort of pagdi, you were a khandani, a worthwhile citizen. So you're a good citizen if you're a good person, and if you tie a turban, that's all what Arya Samaj is required. And the Samaj taught him in no uncertain terms that the true heritage of an Indian was the Vedic heritage. And the true language of an Indian, Sanskrit, the language of the Vedas. Since Sanskrit was an ancient language, its modern derivative Hindi, so derivative, Hindi comes from Sanskrit, right? Hindi has been derived from Sanskrit, would do if you were unable to get that far back. So if you're not a Sanskrit speaker, it's fine. And hardly anybody speaks Sanskrit in like daily life or regular daily everyday conversations. Sanskrit is people who study it, or some of us study it in schools, but nobody speaks it anymore, right? It's usually Hindi, the spoken, the derivative of Sanskrit. So if you were unable to get that far back, if you were unable to learn or speak Sanskrit, Hindi is fine. Hindi would do. So when the census was taken, census is population count, was taken by the government every 10th year. Lala Kanshi Ram dutifully entered against the column for mother tongue the word Hindi. So a census asks you everything, right? How many people are in your family, job, what language is your mother tongue, what other languages you know, right? He neither spoke Hindi nor ever wrote it on paper. When he opened his mouth, he spoke Punjabi. So now he knows till now Hindi, Punjabi as well as Urdu. When he spoke his mouth, he spoke Punjabi, the rich and virile language of the province to which he belonged. So we do know that till even today there is a Punjab in Pakistan, right? Once you cross the Wagah border. Rich and virile language of the province to which he belonged. So he belonged to the Punjab province. That's why he knew it. And when it came to writing, whether the entries in his shop ledger, so bookkeeping, accounts, or a note to the vendor down the road, he wrote in Urdu. Who said it was the language of the Muslims? So it's not like a Muslim cannot speak Hindi or Sanskrit, or read and write Sanskrit, or a Hindu cannot speak Urdu. It's very mixed. So you speak the language, the people you live with, the community you grew up in. He had learned it from his father and from the primary teacher in his village a few miles out of Sialkot, and neither of the two was a Muslim. The upshot was that every morning after his breakfast, he would also be interested in learning languages in general, right? After his breakfast, he spent at least a half hour reading through the Urdu newspaper he took. No one in the house was allowed as much as to whisper during this sacred half an hour. So, because, of course, if there's any sound, it will disturb him. Don't you see your father is looking through the paper? Prabha Rani, his wife, would tell Arun sternly, strictly, if he made the slightest sound. And in that rebuke was the pride of select ownership. Or wasn't her Lalaji the most learned man in the whole neighborhood? So she takes pride in her husband. She's proud of Kanshi Ram that he can knows how to read the paper. It's a huge deal. So he's a literate person. Wasn't he an avatar of Vishnu so far as she was concerned? So she really respects her husband. Lala Kanshi Ram at such moments was propped up on his bed. Having finished his bath and his morning prayers, he would be ready for his nashta, breakfast. Nashta was one of the Urdu words Lala Kanshi Ram liked particularly. It gave him the feeling of status. So even till date, we use, a mix of Hindi and Urdu in daily life. Like darwaza. Darwaza is an Urdu word, right? And nashta as well. Or shadi, wedding. So otherwise the Hindi word for that would be, vivah, or for darwaza it would be dwar. So he really liked the word nashta because it gave him the feeling of status, that I am important. What he in fact took in the morning in the morning was a glass of milk. So this is his nashta. His breakfast is a glass of milk. A heavy breakfast does not agree with his system. So as you start getting older, you can't really digest heavy breakfast or heavy meals. And Prabha Rani would boil pure cow's milk, let it cool a little bit, and serve it to him in a long brass tumbler. She no doubt knew how important his health was to her and the entire family. Who else was there to take care of her if he was gone? Because he is the member who's earning, right? He has to take care of everybody. Who else had she in the entire wide world? Her eyes brimming with sentimental tears, she poured a lot of thick cream on top of the milk. Yeah. So it's a heavy glass of milk, right? Yeah. She also threw a handful of peeled almonds into the brass tumbler before she took the milk to him. These almonds she soaked in water. Last thing, so a lot of us also eat, almonds or badam in the morning. It's soaked in water last thing at night before she went to bed. So you peel the almonds and then you eat it. It's said that it's good for memory. In the morning, she had only to press them lightly from one side, and out came the white, smooth nuts slipping onto her hand. This hot stew of milk, patchy, cream, and white almonds with at least 4 spoons of sugar in the mixture to give it the right flavor, Prabha Rani carried to Lala Kanshi Ram sitting on the bed. So the glass of milk, of course, it's really heavy glass of milk. It's not just a milk. It was a middle class home and they did not have a separate living room. There were tables and a few chairs, but they were only used when a guest arrived. The family sat down and relaxed on beds, except for Lala Kanshi Ram, who used an antique sprawling easy chair in the evenings. At night, the arrangement was somewhat altered, depending on the number of guests in the house, but no one dared to intrude into the chorus room, at least not during the day. It was the citadel of the head of the family, as the data processing forms of the government would have him called. He sat there alone and undisturbed. Lakanshi Ram took the long brass tumbler of milk. So now we are back to what is happening in real time. Till now we were discussing their sort of daily routine almost. From Prabharani and wrapping himself in a chadar, leaned back against the round, tightly stuffed pillow. It was then he opened the morning paper and, adjusting his glasses, resumed his own and his wife's education. While he rolled the milk in his mouth with infinite pleasure, taking time to crunch the almonds and break up and swallow the thick cream, his eyes roved on the page with their own hunger. And from time to time, he spoke out loud. Now, from these few paragraphs, you can already see the writing style. So it's not very difficult language, right? There are a few words here and there, but that's okay. That happens with every novel. And it's also very graphic and explicit, as we discussed. So look at the way Chaman Nahal, he's describing the way just, Kanshiram drinking a glass of milk, but so much detail. Arun's mother, you know what? Germany has turned round and attacked Rus. Coming as it did from a mouth filled with milk, Rus sounded far more impressive and terrible than Russia. It dropped an atom bomb on Japan. Now, World War II, a lot of destruction happening, even though it's 1947. So today Gandhiji goes on a fast unto death. A lot of news. So Hiroshima, Nagasaki, world news, Gandhiji, Indian freedom struggle, what is going on, politics, religion. We have a new viceroy now, Lord Mountbatten. He's related to His Majesty the King. So King was the king that time, King George. I mean, before Queen Elizabeth became. Very often, so all these headlines are not exactly 3rd June 1947. You have to understand that. It's just the way Lala Kanshiram communicates the headlines to his wife. Okay? These, of course, are a few years apart here and there. Not very accurate as per 1947. Very often, he stopped in the middle of his explanations and looking up from the page, peered at his wife from above the rim of his glasses. Patiently, he asked, "You know what a fast unto death means, don't you?" Of course. So Gandhiji is on a fast. So he's fasting until death. He will not take any food or water until certain issues are resolved. Prabha Rani nodded her head in slow appreciation, but Lala Kanshi Ram went on in a liberal mood. It means a fast until a person dies. He took on a tearful tone. Gandhiji might now die. He might pass away. Prabharani uttered a desperate "Hi Ram," and satisfied he had created the right dramatic tension, he passed on to the other subjects. So it's not very, boring morning newspaper read. It's a very interesting, dramatic, theatrical read. You know what an atom bomb is? And when his wife doubtfully shook her head and said no, she did not know, Kanshi Ram had the time of his life. Pontifically, he lurched forward and took hold of the opportunity with both hands, as it were, of revealing the mysteries of the universe to this peasant woman. So, peasant woman, almost like not very knowledgeable or illiterate, right? Whom he had married when she was only 13 and who could not tell an alif from a bai, who till this day thought they lived on a flat earth and not a round one. So she's not very worldly. She is not very aware of, whether it's science or current affairs or general knowledge. So, of course, the earth is round, right? It's not flat. He had since taught her many things, including how to sign her name. Though she still could not read and write. So she's illiterate, but she, thanks to her husband, she knows how to sign her name. He would teach her more, and he said to himself complacently. So you don't know what an atom bomb is. Yeah. So now he's very, very interested in explaining what the atom bomb is. Now, complacent is very, very self-satisfied. So very, very happy about yourself. That's why he said to him self-complacently that he would teach her more. So he's very happy with himself, very satisfied with himself, and that I'm in a position to teach her, right? So, or help somebody, or I have that knowledge to teach somebody. Okay, so that's complacent. And pontification is pompous, like a show off. So we read the word, right? In this paragraph, pontifically he lurched forward and took hold of the opportunity. So as if like, oh, you don't know? Okay, I'll show you. Like, coming forward that way. So, while Prabha Rani stood with her eyes on the ground looking guilty, as if she's done something wrong. कोई मतलब, गुनाह कर दिया, crying as if you don't know what atom bomb is, so it's a very big deal. An atom bomb, Arun's mother, is a bomb filled with liquid fire. He said, slowly rolling the milk in his mouth. He had a slight doubt. Wasn't that what it was? He went on with confidence. So, even he's not sure what an atom bomb exactly is, but he's just trying to wing it, what we say, in language of slang, that's just okay. I'm not sure, maybe, but I will proceed with confidence because the other person doesn't know anyway. So they are trusting me. Whatever I share with them, they will believe me. Millions of people perish, they die when you drop such a bomb, as what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There was no problem about that. It was all in the paper. But what really was the bomb? What was the principle behind it? So, the science behind it. How is it made? You remember the Mahabharata, don't you? And he looked at his wife with a little annoyance at her slow grasp of things. Remember the last days of the epic battle? His wife was now vigorously nodding her head. Because this is something she knows, right? Mahabharata. And saying yes, yes, yes. The fire darts they threw at each other, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. So, maybe, a tir which has fire. After a pause, well, it is like that, the atom bomb. You throw a dart or a bomb at your enemy and that burns him up. Then, yeah, so of course, the tir also and also the fire darts. So you have, even in the Republic Day parade, tanks and you have balls literally of fire, okay? Very, very heavy. From the tankers, they come and then, attack. Then it is nothing new these Angrez log have made. That line of reasoning was to Lala Kanchi Ram's taste. It prevented serious thinking and it satisfied some deep national urge in him. New? So now this question is being asked by Prabha, his wife. New? He said with obvious relief. What are you talking about? No other nation in the world can ever touch the glory of the Vedic civilization. So, that Bharat or India, the Vishwaguru, can ever invent anything we haven't already found. And these English particularly, the race of monkeys, who till a few hundred years back used to live in jungles, why you ought to read Satyarth Prakash. The entire Europe was a piece of swamp. So swamp is very, very dirty area. Okay, it's just almost like fungi is growing and you have water and no sort of civilization, while great kingdoms flourished in the land of Bharat. Did many people die in Japan? Asked Prabharani eagerly to convince him how much she valued his discourse. While in her mind, she was thinking of the food which would soon burn in the pan. So because she has to take care of the house, she's also cooking simultaneously. So that's going on behind her head. So millions died in Japan, whispered Lala Kanchiram in sorrow for his suffering brother, secretly relieved it was the brother who was the victim. His finest moments of elation came when the news pertained to the British royal family. Like any other Indian, he had a prejudice against the British. He spoke of them as the Angrez, the English. In some novels, you'll also see Firang, right? Or Giori Gore, right? He hated them for what they had done to his country and wanted Azadi. Throughout the Second World War, he had prayed they be defeated by the Germans. The news of German victories at front after front had pleased him beyond measure, and when eventually they were held and contained by the British, Lala Kanshi Ram did not give up. So, World War II, you had Hitler, right? And Germany was being fought. So, Germany and Italy were on one side and they were fighting Russia, America, and UK. Okay, Russia, America, UK, and France. And of course, Italy and Germany lost, and especially Germany. And we know that Hitler, committed suicide. So they were contained by the British. Lala Kanchiram does not give up. With the coming of flying bombs in 1944, with hundreds of V2s falling on London every day, and the chance of a British defeat against becoming pronounced, he loudly proclaimed he had known all along that one day the Germans would defeat this Bandar race, the monkey race, Bandar race, sorry. So Bandar now, so it's a transliteration, the Hindi word written in English. Now, so this is giving you a sort of a sense of all that was going around in the world. We haven't even come to per se India, and this is the pre-divided India. So there is no Pakistan yet. Now, this is giving you an idea of the world, what is going on in the world, as well as what Kanshiram thinks of the British, of his wife, his daily routine, and his personality also, because what is he reading throughout the day? Okay, what is he reading? How is he behaving with his own family members? And other things as well, how he likes his breakfast, nashta, his relationship with languages. Deeper down, he also admired the British. In any case, he enjoyed the safety of the British Raj and hugged it lovingly. Now, this is where the hypocrisy or dilemma, not really hypocrisy actually, dilemma comes in, that you love it, you want to, but you also hate it. You want to be free from the British, but you also like, because you feel safe. So then why do you want to be free? So that's the dilemma. Okay, that's the complexity. All said and done, the British had brought some kind of peace to this torn land. Think of the Sikhs after Maharaja Ranjit Singh, or the Marathas. Think of the Muslims in Delhi or in the Deccan. When had this country ever been united? Who let down warriors like Porus or Prithviraj Chauhan? So he is actually thankful or grateful for the British, because probably, there were provinces. So Indians came together as a nation, as one race or one community to fight the British. So maybe he is thinking about that, but also, uh, you know, living in peace with each other. There are no two rulers or provinces fighting each other, or tribes. For that matter, who let down the Mughals in their fight against the British? Always our own men, our own kith and kin. So our own relatives, our own blood relations. And the British had somehow made a nation of us, which is what I meant, that, unity. So before the British had come in 1700s, there was a lot of divisions. So, you had rulers in the south trying to capture the north, vice versa. Mughals trying to expand their empire. You had Prithviraj, as in Shivaji. You had a lot of different rulers in various provinces, states. Okay. Or was it Gandhiji who had done that? Lala Kanshi Ram was confused about this point, but he did not let that interfere with the drift of his argument. So whatever he's confused with, if he's confused about, okay, how exactly is the atom bomb made, he's not sure. He does not really look it up, or he's not very curious to know what the correct answers. He just moves on to the next point. Okay, this is fine. What I'm saying is fine. I'll go on to the next point. I'm confident about that. So I hope that this section of the novel that we've read interests you enough to motivate you to read the rest of the novel. Please read both the novels as well as E.M. Foster's aspects of the novel. It's really important, and Chaman Nahal's Azadi as well as Anandmant are both very interesting novels and very not very difficult reads. So it's quick. So you can finish it quickly if you pay attention and read at once. And yeah, I think we'll end here for today. So thank you everyone for coming and attending. And I hope you read all the novels in your course.